friends. Welcome to Dads and Daddies, a podcast about the lives and times of adult gay men in the here and now. I'm Brian Rubin Sowers, the dad.
And I am Judson Morrow, the daddy.
Hi, Judson.
Hey, Brian. What's up, dude?
This is exciting.
This is super exciting. What in the world are we doing here?
What are we doing? Well, let's talk about that. Hey, listeners, thank you for joining us for what is our very first episode of Dads and Daddies. We are here to have conversations about, like I said, what it means to be alive today in the here and now for an adult gay man, which is what the two of us are. I happen to be a dad of two beautiful daughters, ages 8 and 5. I am married to a wonderful, beautiful husband. And we are in an open marriage. And that is one of the many things we will spend time exploring on this podcast. Judson, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll chime in here. As you heard previously, I'm the daddy. It goes way beyond our conceptions of perhaps Tom of Finland. There's so much more to it than that. It's an attitude, it's an execution, and I'm also here to talk about my experiences as someone in an open marriage, someone who's been out longer than they've ever been in, and someone who's just on his road through recovery. It does beg the question. Okay, so do two cisgender, middle-aged, middle-class, white gay men need another podcast? My answer to that is simply, do you think our straight counterparts ask themselves the same question before they launch into the pod universe? I don't think so.
Probably not. Maybe some. But I personally think that, as you know, I turned 50 this past year. And turning 50 for me was a huge motivator. And it really got me to kind of make some realizations. And one of the most important was that I'm finally in a place in my life where I feel like I have something important to say and pass on. And I hope that it is of help and service to others. And what that is that I've achieved what I believe to be a really near perfect family life. I've been with my husband for just over 12 years, married for close to 10. We have a bit of an age difference. I'm 9 years older than my husband. We have, as I mentioned, 2 kids. And we are pretty, I don't mean to say this in a boastful way, but we're pretty blissfully happy. And I think we figured a lot out that I can talk about. And I think, so that's one thing. But I also think that in getting to know you and our friend circle, I've become much more comfortable talking about myself more publicly as a sexual being. And I think there are conversations that there are folks like us out there that people would like to be having. I know this from experience from when these topics do come up with some friends. I can see them kind of itching to join the conversation, but maybe not comfortable because their partner's there in the room or other friends are in the room who they don't want to have the conversation in front of. And I want to have those conversations here where people can pull up a chair and listen in and realize that you're not the only one having maybe the thoughts or struggles or questions that you're having. And we want to be able to help you have those conversations and maybe even help you have them with those other people in your lives.
And I'm here because I take people who take their creative pursuit seriously. This man across from me invited me to lunch and presented me with a PowerPoint presentation about why I should be his podcast co-host. And I thought to myself, yes, what a compelling presentation. It was animated, there were sound effects, and
I'm not sure any of that is true.
The font choice was spectacular.
Thank you.
And I, by profession, I am a teacher and a coach, and I've dabbled just a little bit in stand-up comedy, so having a microphone in front of me is pretty comfortable. And again, it's kind of take it or leave it. I hope it's valuable. I hope that we can be of service, having had distinct experiences as individuals and in our marriages. And we just have a roster of topics to discuss, from douching to financial planning. There's so much to cover.
Yes, sure. And, you know, we're very excited to be on this adventure together and for you all to be joining us on this adventure. We don't entirely know where it's going to take us, but we hope and assume that we are going to have very cool, fun, exciting conversations, but also bring on very cool, fun, exciting guests, and just explore, like I said, everything that it means to be an adult. We're saying adult. We're not saying mature.
Yeah, mature is
has
loaded
connotations. But, you know, we think that it means something to be an adult gay man in the world today, you know, who does deal with things like marriage, parenting, you know, addiction and recovery,
ageism,
and I think there's gonna be a lot of talk about
heterosexism.
I think there's gonna be a lot of talk about sex.
I hope so.
So, yeah, you know, please, I hope you stick with us over. Oh, and the one thing I want to say too is that the conversations we're going to have are going to be very off the cuff, unrehearsed. This is not like the two of us sit down and prepare an outline. We essentially look at each other and say, "What do you want to talk about next week?" And
push record.
We'll pick one or two words, and then so let's just see where it goes. So with that, we don't want to overstay our welcome already right away. So we're going to come right back and we'll get into this week's topic, our first topic, which is open relationships. So one of the many things that excites me about doing this podcast with you is that we don't actually know each other that well.
Correct.
And I think we know enough to agree that getting to know one another on this pod will be fun and interesting, not only for us, but for those out there who've found their way to us to pull up a chair and listen in.
I hope so.
I hope so. But one thing we do know about one another that we have in common is that we are both in what we each consider, I think, if you will agree, to be successful open marriages.
Correct. I do think my open marriage is a hit.
So I'm curious. So you and your husband, you've been married for 8 years.
Correct.
Together for 13.
Yes.
Okay.
We met in November of 2010. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. We met in January of 2012. So not all that dissimilar. We've been married for 10 years, together for 12. How did you and your husband first come to be in an open relationship?
It was very early on. I often think that people frame open relationships as like the last resort. Like, oh, we've tried everything else. We might as well just have sex with other people.
Right.
And it wasn't so much a conversation as it was an invitation. We had been out to dinner with a group of his friends. It was a birthday. It was in Chelsea. And after we left dinner, he said, hey, there's this party happening nearby, and I think it would be really fun if we went together.
Okay. And how long had you been together at this point?
Like 6 weeks, maybe.
Oh, wow. Okay,
this
very
was
early
like,
then.
yeah, we had met in November 2010, and this was like early January 2011.
Okay.
So like not even 2 months.
Right around your birthday.
Right around my birthday. Yeah. I think it was just after. So he invites me to this party, and I said, what kind of party? At the time, I was still drinking, so I was kind of up for like any kind of party.
Okay.
But he specifically said a sex party, and
that was brave of him. 6 weeks in to invite you to a sex party.
Yeah, and like looking back on it, I remember when we first met, I was sprung, man. Like I was very in love with this person immediately.
Yes.
And even though I think it's pretty normal to like date simultaneously or fuck other people while you're dating people simultaneously, I don't think that I was having sex with other people when he and I first started to spend time together.
Right.
Because the sex was so good.
Yeah.
We were having sex all the time because we were new.
Yeah.
And I don't even think it crossed my mind.
Right.
To be sleeping with other people.
Yeah.
Not because I was like, oh, I'm devoted. I just was like very into the thing that I was doing.
Yeah, and you were satisfied.
Extremely.
Yeah.
So he asked me to go to this party with him, and I got really nervous, not because I hadn't been to similar parties, but I had never been to a party with someone I liked.
Right.
Right. And I had no idea how to navigate it. And he's like, well, we should just go and figure it out, which is kind of the vibe. And since I can't remember where the party was, I can't remember who I spent time with, whether he and I did stuff together, like separated and came back.
Was this like a spontaneous, like, let's go to this party right now? Or was there planning involved?
No, he was like, let's go to this sex party right now.
Got it.
So
Okay.
he had clearly had it on his mind.
Right.
And I wasn't upset that he like sprung it on me.
Sure.
It's just he had been thinking about it. It had not been discussed. I was into the idea, and I think from there we were open. Like
Right.
that is having gone to a sex party together is what like opened the conversation for
Yeah.
us. And it was very early.
Did you have any conversations about it after the fact that like, okay, we're going to do this and this is how we're going to navigate it?
I don't remember. Certainly, like we
Right.
talk about the openness a lot,
Yeah.
but I couldn't tell you like if we established rules or
Right.
if it was like parties. I don't know. It was so long ago.
Do you have any rules now?
Yeah, it's be safe, have fun, tell me all about it, and no drugs.
Right.
Which is like a guiding principle for me as a sober
Right.
person.
Is that a rule for both of you? Like he has to follow the no
No.
drugs rule as well?
So we used to party a little bit together, and to be specific, I don't mean like crystal meth party. I mean like we would go to the black party and do Molly,
Right.
or like go to the white party and do Molly.
Right.
But when I stopped, he stopped, but he still drinks like a
Right.
normal person, which is extremely admirable. I'm like, you had half a glass of wine? Like, how? But he will from time to time do like a 5 milligram edible, like to go to a party.
Right.
So the same rule doesn't necessarily apply, but the be safe, have fun, and tell me all about it, which is open to interpretation. It's not tell me all about it before, tell me all about it during, or
Right.
tell me all about it after. It's like at some point, like, please inform me. I normally tell him before because he's my priority.
Right.
Like our hang is my priority.
Right.
So if I want to go have sex with someone else, I want to check in to see like what other plans he might have for us or for himself.
Right.
Before I'm just like, okay, gonna go hook up.
Right. And so you two are without children, like
We're childless.
unlike
petless as
my
well.
situation. So I'm curious, can these happen at any time, or do you have specific times that are allotted for this, or?
I think they can happen. Well, one of the things, and this is for anyone that has ever tried to navigate like sex on the apps, like scheduling is such a bitch,
Yes.
right? And it's like I'm a busy person.
Yes.
He's a busy person. We have a lot of things we do together, a lot of things that we do separately. We have work, we have family, we have our own hobbies and interests, we have exercise, and like you kind of have to schedule it.
Right.
I love the moments where I'm just like very free at that moment.
Right.
But I would say that's like 1 out of every 10 hookups. Like
Interesting.
I have to
Okay.
book it. So are there times? It's interesting because even yesterday he plays tennis on Thursdays.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I scheduled a hookup like while you're at tennis. And he said, you can have it while I'm home. But that to me is more like vacation vibes.
Right.
Like if we're on vacation, I'm probably more likely to have sex with someone when he's around.
Right.
Or like include him,
Right.
of course. But during the workday, I don't. Fortunately, I'm very, very privileged to have enough space that like he can be out working in the living room, and then the bedroom is in the back of the house, so there is like a nice separation. But I don't know. I don't like to have sex during the workday with him there, and it's not because it's exclusionary. It's because like the dude is working.
Right.
Like he has a job, and I
Right.
just don't want to. I don't want to interrupt that.
Right. So we also started because of a party.
Oh, cool. Early on? Like early into the
We
relationship?
had been, no, so I mean, for us, it was a year and a half, year and 8 months into our
That's early.
relationship. So yes, relatively early. But like you said, it wasn't some kind of like, last resort or,
Yeah.
it was very kind of organic. Now, listen, I always thought I would never be able to have an open relationship. I always thought of myself as somebody who would be extremely jealous.
Yeah.
And
What informed that? Why did you think that?
I just thought that's who I was. I just couldn't imagine. I'm such a romantic. And I also want to preface this, and I know this is true for you too. Like, I'm madly, deeply in love with my husband,
Same.
and my husband is like
Obsessed.
number one
Yeah.
above all else.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I love about my husband and about our marriage is our respect for each other's freedom and independence. And I think for me, that's really where this originates. It's not about like necessarily a need to sleep with every last person in New York City, but
I mean,
well, on some level it is.
it's a good goal.
Yeah, okay. But I think there's something about a relationship and marriage specifically that when you enter into it, it feels like you are giving up a significant amount of
It's intrinsic.
freedom and
the loss of
independence.
autonomy.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Loss of autonomy. And certainly as a man and certainly as a gay man, I think we understand these like urges we have. And, we get horny, and there's something exciting and irreplaceable about hooking up with a stranger.
Totally.
And to give that up, I think, is one of the hardest parts of giving up your freedom, independence, autonomy. So, but for me, like I said, I always thought I'd be a jealous person, but somehow when my husband and I got together, and I'm not using his name only because I neglected to remember to ask him how comfortable he is with me using his name. I think he's probably okay with it, and I'm going to slip at some point anyway. But it was so clear very early on that our love kind of transcended jealousy, and that I knew that like we have such a deep trust for each other, and that no
Yeah.
matter what happens in terms of extramarital sex, that it wouldn't impact our love for each other, our desire to be with each other for the rest of our lives, to raise a family together, all of these things. And
It actually adds to all of those things.
it really does, which I think there's a misconception that it actually detracts.
They're in competition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know this term compersion?
Compersion?
Yes.
I
just learned this.
No.
So compersion is, I think I wrote down the definition somewhere here. If you Google it, the definition on Masterclass comes up. On Masterclass, it
We'll
states
be
that-
there soon.
Yeah, exactly. It states the word compersion refers to a form of joy in the joy of others. In the world of consensually non-monogamous relationships, it more specifically relates to the happiness someone finds in their partner seeking out and enjoying sexual and romantic intimacy with other people.
Okay. Deeply felt. I love this word.
Yeah, it's essentially like somewhere between the opposite of schadenfreude and jealousy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's happy that you're happy.
Yeah, and specific. I just finished this book, which here I brought to show you.
Gorgeous.
More, a memoir of open marriage, and it's really fascinating. And I really want to reach out to this writer, Molly Roden-Winter, and have her be a guest at some point on this podcast.
Oh, I'm in.
Because she's a mom in Brooklyn, in Park Slope. She's a year older than I am. She also is a mother of 2 kids. Hers are boys, mine are girls. In this book, she mentions Windsor Terrace, Greenwood Cemetery, the Q train. It was like very real.
Yeah, relatable.
And it's very interesting, and we can get into it either today or at another point, but like the similarities and differences between open marriage for a straight couple versus I think what you and I experience.
Yeah.
Because theirs is much more about like actual dating and like going to shows and going to get drinks or dinner, and like there's actual relationships, which is not how we manage ours.
Does this author define it as like open or as polyamorous?
No, open.
It's open.
Open. But
Okay.
then eventually in the book starts, so they each set up OkCupid profiles and label themselves as ethically non-monogamous, ENM.
Okay.
And they both eventually start to date people who do consider themselves poly. And so compersion is a term that she learns from one of these people she's dating who is poly. And I guess this is a big term in that world. I guess there's a book that I need to research called The Ethical Slut, which is apparently like the Bible for being poly, and that it goes into this term of compersion. But you and I have talked about how good it makes us feel and how it actually turns us on to like know about our husbands being with other people, right? To like witness it sometimes.
And there's also some relief too. It's just like you're two human beings navigating a very busy, stressful world, and it's like I love you, but like I do not want to look at your dick right now. So there's also something that there's a kind of a relief built in. It's
Right.
like, yeah, girl, go get it.
Yeah.
Like it's not gonna be for me.
And like you said, it's like, I know you've said that it is almost, it makes you feel good to know that there are other folks who find your husband as hot as you do.
Oh, yeah. The validation
Yeah.
of seeing other very attractive men
Yeah.
into the person
Yeah.
I have decided to make my life partner.
Yeah.
That part is very cool.
Yeah.
It also makes me like really proud of him. Like the trade that my husband pulls,
Yeah.
it's just like, I don't want it to sound like I'm underestimating him because he's a babe, but
Right.
it's just so impressive.
Right.
And it has a lot to do with his physical form,
Yeah.
his age, and also he's just very good at being super direct.
Yeah.
He's like, he has good advice too. He's like, oh, see that hot wallflower that's standing all by themselves, dying for someone to speak to them?
Yeah.
Like, he's up.
It's so I'm also curious to hear about like how your open relationship has evolved. So to go back to what I was saying, ours also started because of a party. We had been together about a year and 8 months. And I, before my husband, was a huge fan of Grindr and hookups. I met my husband on Grindr. But I'm
Cute.
yeah, thank you. But
Cute.
I'm such a romantic, and I love my husband. And to this day, I find my husband hotter than anybody that I hook up with. I think our sex is better than the sex I have with anybody else. But there was something, I was still turned on by the idea of potentially having hookups again. And we were on Fire Island. This
Okay,
was
so like this sets the mood.
this sets the mood.
Sex is in the air.
Fire Island, if there's any of you listening who don't know, is a gay summer destination just outside of New York City. And so this party, it's an annual party called Spartacus, which I'm not sure if you've ever attended.
No,
Spartacus. It's a
I'm
Daniel
unfamiliar.
Nardicio party.
Okay.
But this was only the second year that he had thrown it. Now it's, this was 2000. What was that? If we met in 2012, this was 2013. This was September. It always takes place the weekend after Labor Day weekend, and it takes place at the Belvedere, which is a hotel that I was going to say from afar, but from afar or up close looks like it's Liberace's mansion.
Yeah, it's Liberace's fever dream.
Yes, and it is
crazy.
an all-male clothing optional hotel. Anyway, this party was happening. We happened to be out there totally by coincidence. We did not plan to be out there the same weekend as this party, but we kept seeing the posters everywhere. And I got the sense between the location, Daniel Nardicio throwing it, the posters, that this was a party that if it didn't begin as a sex party, it's certainly going to evolve into
Yeah,
one.
and it's a place that is just de facto very sexually charged.
Yes.
I think that's a fair assumption.
And so Toby and I, there I went. I slipped and said his name. We were walking the beach, and I remember talking to him about his level of interest in going to this party, and he was not very interested, but the more we ran into people that we knew, because when you're on Fire Island, you can't help but run into people that you know.
Constant.
People seemed to have an interest in going to this party. It seemed like, maybe it would be accessible even for those who weren't into full out sex party. And so we went and we're having a great time. I believe it was the kind of thing where there was an entrance fee, but then an open bar. And after a while, the hotel is on the bay, and people were kind of moving towards the bayside right along the water and starting to get frisky with one another. And so, Toby and I started to interact with some people, and nothing went incredibly far that night. It was our first time experimenting with this, and we hadn't had any kind of conversation about it beforehand. But then the next morning in the kitchen of the place we were staying, we kind of talked about, what does that mean and what do we want to do? And so, and at first we had like a ton of rules. There were no apps. Like we couldn't have any apps on our phone, because we had friends who were open, and it felt like you never could get their attention because they were just always on Grindr when we were with them, and we didn't want to,
even when you were hanging out.
Yes. And like we didn't want to be those people.
Sure.
So we said no apps. It was very much don't ask, don't tell. Like we didn't want to.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a tactic.
It is. I believe we said at the time no repeats, because we didn't want to have a concern about anything becoming something bigger.
Which I want to pin here. One of the criticisms of open relationships is like, well, what if you fall in love?
Right.
To which I can only respond, people fall in love without ever having sex.
Right.
Right? Like you think about two colleagues who are side by side 40 hours a week, less so now after COVID.
Right.
But it's like you've realized that the repetition doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Correct.
Because love grows even without sex outside of relationships.
Yes. And on the converse, or paired with that, is you can have sex with somebody a number of times and not fall in love with them.
Yeah.
Even good sex. And so then that started to evolve. And first, what would happen is each year in Fire Island, because, we would go out every summer, and usually we would go out with friends, but there would typically be one weekend where it was just the two of us. And every year we would walk on the beach, and we would start to talk a little bit, largely because, or probably solely because I would bring it up, and we would start to, because I realized that I really enjoyed hearing about his hookups. And
my
also
husband likes that too.
Kind of wanted to tell him about
Of
mine,
course.
Yeah. And so we would talk about it a little bit. And then eventually it became clear that you couldn't do this without the apps. And we each have a different memory of who broke that rule first. I think it was him, and he thinks it was me. But and that we found out about it on one of these beach walks on Fire Island, talking about all of this, and we kind of realized, like, that doesn't make sense.
I thought you were going to find out about it having found each other on Grindr.
No.
Woof.
Yeah. And then what? And then talking about it became a little bit more frequent. We would talk about it. We're very good about, we'll obviously on this podcast get a lot more into my family life and parenting. But one of the things that I think we're very good about is putting our marriage, putting a high priority on our marriage. And so we spend not a lot, but we have a lot. We do prioritize date nights, I think, more than the average parent couple that we know. And so anyway, on our date nights, we would start to talk about it a little bit, and that would really turn me on. But one thing that my husband was always very clear on was that group activity was not of interest to him, and group activity is very much of interest to me.
As a rule, was that like a rule and recommendation for you, or he was just saying like, "Oh, I don't want to do groups. Like I'm gonna." He didn't want
to do groups with me involved, and he likely wouldn't. It's not his first choice to do groups, I think, full stop. But I'm talking about with including me. Like he didn't want us to have threesomes together. He wanted our
separate sex lives
outside of the sex life that we share.
Is it still that way?
No, but only very recently. Only in the last 2 or 3 years.
You've like had a threesome.
Now we've had,
Okay,
yes,
great. Good.
several. No, and it's a lot of fun. But it's funny, like we've like everything. So yeah, so first it was, no apps, but we realized that didn't make sense. Then it was, we don't want to talk about it, but then we realized like talking about it actually is maybe kind of fun. And now we talk about it, obviously not ever within earshot of our children, but now we talk about it fairly regularly. At this point, I kind of feel like we have no rules. Obviously, at the beginning, also safety, like sexual safety, was of a major concern. And then because we weren't on PrEP when we first opened the relationship.
Pre-PrEP.
It was pre-PrEP, yeah.
Well, I mean, sort of at the same time, but it certainly doesn't have like the cachet and known efficacy.
Right.
Like, it hit the market in 2012.
Right.
And it was new.
Right. So after we went to another Daniel Narduccio party, which I personally think for a paid sex party, which again, like we'll get into sex parties another time because that's a whole topic that you and I know want to go into.
Totally.
Have you ever been to Bathhouse and Beyond?
I have not, but I've heard wonderful things.
Oh my God. I think for a sex party that you pay admission for, there's nothing better. It is.
I don't mind paying ever, largely because it's efficient. Like, rather than spending my whole day fucking around online hoping something will happen.
Sure.
I can just drop 30. I think Bed Bath & Beyond is more expensive than that. But
it's expensive. No, but I'm talking about in comparison to a sex party you might be invited to.
Oh, yeah, like hosted by a friend.
Yes, exactly.
Or any more like a group hang on Sniffies.
Yeah, which I feel like is almost a third category. Yeah. Anyway, we eventually went to Bed Bath House and Beyond, which is a party where you were required to wear towels, which may have been true of Spartacus. I can't remember. You're required to wear towels, and it is meant to recreate the bathhouses that Bette Midler performed in in the 70s, and with Barry Manilow as her accompanist. And there's an incredible performer who's an incredible cabaret star in her own right named Amber Martin, who comes out and performs as Bette Midler for 3 different sets in the night.
So
and
cool.
It's like, and each set I want to say is 15, 20 minutes. And it's like at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock.
Enough to regenerate another load, right?
Well, no, because here's the thing. So because it's you're in towels and you can't have a wallet or anything, you pay an admission, but again, it's an open bar. And everybody's around in towels. It's at a private home. You're standing around a pool. And through at least the time that I attended, and again, this was many years ago, through her third performance, it's just a party with like a lot of guys just standing around in towels talking. And yes, maybe there's somebody trying to start something earlier in the evening, but for the most part, it's just a really lovely social party. And then at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and midnight, again, I may be not entirely accurate, but that's how I remember it, Amber Martin comes out and performs a set as Bette Midler, and she's got an incredible voice, and she's right there in front of you. It's very intimate. One of the numbers, she comes out completely naked, and after her final set, plus her accompanist, and I wish I could pull his name out right now, who quote unquote plays the Barry Manilow role, is also incredible and amazing and has his own moment. So it's just a beautiful like piece of theater anyway.
Yeah.
But then after the third set, it like evolved into a proper sex party. And then the next morning, I wasn't sure if anything had happened that night that bordered on unsafe. So the next morning I said to him, I think we should look into this thing we hear about called PrEP. And ever since then, yes, be safe, but like, it's clearly much less of a concern when it comes to.
I mean, PrEP is safe.
Yeah, yeah. And now there's, we can talk about DoxyPep at 1.2 in terms of all the other STIs. Safety was certainly a rule at the beginning as well. And now, as you can see, like it went from don't ask, don't tell to now, we're fairly open talking about it with friends, certainly with our gay friends. We have kind of hinted at it in certain situations with some of our straight friends. My joke is that, he can sleep with whoever he wants, but if he watches a TV show that we're supposed to watch together, that is cheating. And when I say that, people like laugh, but also think like, wait, are you saying what I think you're saying? So I've said that in a couple situations with straight friends that I think have taken the hint.
I wonder, not, I don't wonder. I actually just assume people think we're open, but that could be incorrect. Because, I mean, I guess our marriage looks fairly heteronormative. Like
Yeah.
I do say married, I do say husband.
Yeah.
I don't talk about the openness with like my colleagues.
Right.
But maybe just because I assume all gay couples are open, which is not correct. Like it is.
No, and I also want to say, and I kind of regret not having said it earlier, is that it really works for us. I don't know that it works for everybody, and I'm not necessarily telling everybody to go out and open up your marriage. For me, what I have found over time is that the more freedom and independence you can allow your partner in a relationship or marriage, the happier you likely both will be. And I think so much of the tension and so many of the problems that happen in relationships comes from a resentment of feeling trapped.
Controlled.
And yeah, I mean, I knew about Toby very early on, like the last thing, what triggers him most is being told what to do. And there are, and thankfully I don't need to, because we both have found ways of really contributing, I think, equally, if not more, in our marriage. But early on, his mom found an old like Mad Libs at their house, but it was like not official Mad Libs, I don't think. It was like, it was meant for like to help kids express their feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And he had written all about his sister being bossy. It was, I mean, it was BOSY,
yeah.
but like, but we joke now that like, oh, you're being bossy. So like, obviously this is very deep seated from very early on, you know.
The
and
issues
so
are in the tissues, baby.
yeah. And I mean, he was just telling you before we started recording today that, you know, that we're largely codependent, and it's true in many ways, but from the time those kids get dropped off at school to the time they are home, I don't know what he's doing. He doesn't know what I'm doing. And thankfully we both have enough flexibility in our work days that we can like do whatever we want to do.
Yeah. Which I actually wanted to ask you, because you said, you know, it is Dads and Daddies.
Yes.
And, you know, there are plenty of childless folks who have open relationships
Yes.
that might look like mine or like yours.
Yes.
But you did say that you don't talk about it within an earshot of your children, which I guess is probably true for sex, period, with young kids.
Yeah.
But how... Let me offer the motivation for my question.
Okay.
We are only, all of us, presented with the idea of the one. And
Right.
it is deeply, deeply perpetuated
Right.
in ways that people don't even recognize,
Right.
which is what makes open marriages seem so radical.
Right.
Even if you read anything like Robert Wright's The Moral Animal, you understand like the compulsion to be spreading your seed as far and wide as possible.
Yeah.
Right. So how are you planning to balance, or like balance now, wanting to create a space that even presents openness as an idea for your children so they don't feel compelled to exist? I mean, they don't even need to be with anyone if they don't want
Right.
to.
Right.
But like, what do you think is the right age? How are you going to manage it?
You know,
because I think as a person in an open marriage, like that's going so well,
Right.
don't you want to model that for the people that you love?
It's a really interesting and tough question that I am like currently struggling with. And I don't have the answers yet. Thankfully, my daughters are 8 and 5, and so I don't think I have to have these answers quite yet. And
No.
you know, Toby and I will talk about them and figure them out. But I mean, even in doing this podcast, I've started to think like I'm putting myself out there in a way that could very well get back to my kids. And how do I explain?
How so? Like a parent says it. How do you think your kids are going to find out about the content of this podcast?
Well, I mean, kids are computer savvy, and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
sooner than later, somebody Googling my name could come upon a link, and
We hope so.
we hope so. And I'm also, I don't mean this to sound boastful in any way. It's literally just fact, but like I'm a pretty prominent member of the parent community of this
Wait, aren't you
region.
the president?
I'm the co-president of the
Okay, so
Parents Association
you're
at our
in
children's
charge,
school.
baby.
And listen, I don't think one thing has to negate the other. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong or immoral about what we do. And in fact, I think part of the reason I want to do this podcast is I would like to be part of the evolution of society. And I think it's happening. I think like there are books like this memoir I was telling you about more that came out earlier this year. There are TV shows now. There are more and more articles popping up about open relationships and polyamory. I feel like people are cluing into this idea of like you can prioritize freedom in your life and still have a solid, loving relationship. And so I guess that's what we kind of have to pass on, because to be perfectly honest, I don't think that the idea of an open marriage contradicts the idea of there being the one. I still believe Toby is my one. I think that, and maybe that's not true for everybody. And I think, maybe polyamory is a little bit different than what we have, but Toby is always my Northern Star, my guiding light, my knight in shining armor, all of those things. Like, I always feel safe if I am around Toby.
Yeah.
I always feel comforted, feel better, all of those things in a way that, nobody else makes me feel. And again, our sex is better and feels different. Sex with Toby is often a very separate thing from hookup sex, except for when he's part of the hookup sex, which I love more than anything. So I'm hoping that my kids and us don't have to have the conversation until they're old enough, because I don't know. I don't know if I believe that it's the right thing to enter into your sexual being already feeling that this openness is the right idea, or if I want them to be more singular focused at first, and then once they've kind of like realized what sex means and the emotions that can be attached to it and all of those things, then understand that like, okay, but it can also be this other thing that is fun and fulfills these other needs that is separate from the sex that fulfills your emotional needs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, the advice that you would give children around sex is different than what you would give adults. I had a friend who has kids a little older than yours. I want to say like 13 and 9.
Okay.
And she explained to me that you're supposed to you're supposed to touch on the big topics like sex, drugs, alcohol before they're 10.
Wow.
Which sounds young, but because the thing is that after 10, the rebellion starts.
Right.
So you're no longer seen as an authority. So anything that you have to say, it carries less weight.
That's interesting.
So like 8, 9, 10 seems so young
to
be
does.
Talking about these topics, but also it can land because you're still loved, you're still respected.
Right.
Like, did you Did you have a conversation about sex, even straight sex, with your parents when you were a teen?
I don't remember one. I just remember sneaking into the, I don't know what the section in the bookstore is called even, but, and like trying to sneak away and find those books about puberty and read passages to convince myself that these feelings I was having for other boys were natural. And they all said, it's normal if you do and it's normal if you don't. And I thought, well, I guess that makes me feel better.
It's not normal if you don't.
Exactly. I feel like we could go on about this at length, and that we will. But I also want to go into our advice segment that we've been talking about. Go ask your dad.
I think the last thing I'll say before we do that is I know that you were not trying to say open relationship is for everybody.
Right.
But I do think you've been able to highlight and maybe assuage some fears around it with the attitude that, like, yes, it does evolve.
Yes.
And it can be, your relationship is private. How you decide to have an open relationship is between you and your partner.
Yeah.
And what's really helpful, I think, is once you're open, you start to know other people who are open.
Yeah.
And you can have the conversations about, like, how do you navigate this? What happens
Right.
when this?
Well, and that's why I want to do this podcast, because not that I don't see this podcast as being purely about sex or purely about open
No.
relationships, but I feel like it remains this like taboo topic. And even among some of our
Still.
closest gay friends, we kind of shy, away from talking about it in depth. And I feel like even amongst my closest friends, there are people who would love to be able to ask questions or investigate or
Agreed.
talk. And I'm perfectly happy to talk about it. And so, one thing I also wanted to add in terms of like rules and all of that, and being in an open relationship as a dad, because at this point I always say like, oh, I don't think we have rules, but we do have a couple rules. We do not host at our own place.
Fair.
Because the idea of exposing our family home to a stranger just feels bad. We only hook up during times that are not family time. So essentially, when I meet people on the apps, I tell them I'm available Monday through Friday from 9 to 4 because I'm home from dropping off the kids at school by like 8:30, and we typically get them sometime between 4 and 5 o'clock. Obviously, if our hookups don't impact family time because one of us is out of town or whatever, like I just took the kids away for the weekend. So obviously Toby could do whatever he wanted on the weekend outside of hosting. But yeah, I mean, those are, so we have rules to make
There's some
sure
rules.
that, it doesn't impact our family life from the time when we are with our kids, our family is priority. Not necessarily, I don't mean that to say that we make our lives about the kids, and we can have another conversation about.
I've never thought that about you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. No, I do want to explore that more too, because I do think it's an instinct for a lot of parents to, when they have young kids, just to make their lives about their kids. And I'm a strong proponent of not doing that, because I think, the happier the parent, the happier the kid. And I think we have very happy kids who feel very well attended to, and love us very much, and couldn't imagine us doing more with them or spending more time with them. But we take a lot of time for ourselves. We prioritize our marriage. We see a lot of shows. We go on vacations, and I think there's a way to do that. So pin that for a future episode. But let's take a break and then come back with our advice segment, which we are calling Go Ask Your Dad. Go Ask Your Dad is our advice segment. It is your opportunity to send us questions for us to give our thoughts on. Neither Judson nor I are licensed therapists, financial planners, professionals in that way. But we would love to hear your questions that we can provide our thoughts on. To do that, email us. We're at dadsandDaddies@gmail.com. You can email us a written question. You can email us a voice memo for us to play. You can also DM us. We're on Instagram at Dads and Daddies Pod. But yeah, we already have our first questions, so I'm going to spring it on you.
Let her rip, baby.
Okay. The question we have this week for Go Ask Your Dad is, how does someone who is of gay daddy age approach not wanting to be the dad role, but instead still wanting to be the son in a dad-son role play scenario?
Oh, there's an implicit assumption here that we need to clarify immediately.
Okay, what's that?
So this question addresses daddy aged, right?
Right.
And in my opinion, daddiness is not age banded.
Okay.
It's more of an attitude, a set of behaviors, an outlook. I certainly understand what this person is saying.
Right.
Right. They're probably late 40s, mid 50s,
Right.
60s, right? They're going to get approached as the daddy.
Well, I think that's exactly it. Yes.
Got it. So let's do away with the fact that there's no such thing as an age band on Daddy-ness. Someone can be a 24-year-old daddy.
Sure.
If they're maintaining the attitude.
Right.
Specifically that, and this might come as a shock to some people too, a dad is often seen as to be served.
Right.
I think the dad is there to serve, right?
Well, certainly as a dad of 2 young girls, I can tell you that all I do is my whole life is a service role.
Dad and Daddy has that in common.
Yes.
So I'm thinking more specifically about this question, especially how gay men navigate sex.
Yes.
So there's a particular role in a particular fantasy at play, right?
Right.
This person has, whether willingly or just by circumstance of aesthetic and age, fallen into the daddy role.
Yes.
And they want to take the opportunity to explore the son role.
Right.
It kind of reminds me in approaching it how some bottoms won't have sex with a verse top? Like they're
Right.
like, oh, well, you bottom, so you're not really a top.
Okay. Yes.
It's like, okay. My point.
That's a whole other conversation we can get into.
Here's the parallel I'm going to draw. So if you have existing relationships where you are the daddy and you have a sub or a son, that may not be the appropriate relationship to explore the alternative role.
Okay.
Only because it might break the fantasy.
Okay.
So in order to explore the son role, you might want to pursue a new relationship. And I'm not saying it's totally easy to do, but the first thing is A, recognize that that's what you want, which it sounds like this person has done, and B, advertise it as such. It's perfectly okay to ask very directly, Daddy-ness, what you want and what you're
Right.
looking for, right?
Right.
And get as specific as possible. Do you want to be the son of someone the same age? Do you want to be the son of someone younger? Do you want to be the son of someone? This is the other thing. It doesn't necessarily, you can be a daddy bottom. You can be a daddy top. You can be a daddy verse. You can be
Well, talk about that a little bit, because I think at least my assumption is that if I'm looking for a daddy, that I'm looking for somebody to dominate and therefore be a top.
Oh, I think you can dominate from the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe that's my own bottom insecurities at play there.
You can absolutely dominate from the bottom, because again, if you go into the attitude that you are there to serve rather than be served,
Yeah.
the way that you serve is by offering very explicit directions and commands.
Yeah.
Because it's a service to someone to offer that sort of confident directness so they know exactly what to do.
Yeah.
And so they get what they're looking for. If you're a daddy bottom, you are serving your son top, right?
Right.
Fuck daddy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It is often seen as just like the dad is 50, the dad is the top, the end.
Right.
And I just think that is too limited a way of thinking.
Right.
And it's exactly that thinking where this person who's asked this question has found themselves, because the definitions are so slim.
Right.
But as long as you know what you want, as long as you ask it directly, I think it could really, really amplify and expand your understanding of your own daddiness,
Yeah.
your own sonness, your own versatility.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be great. But the one thing I would recommend is if you have these very strict roles existing in other relationships, unless this is like a profound sort of love/friendship where you can talk about switching roles,
Right.
you might want to just keep the role intact
Right.
and pursue a new partner.
Right. There's so much that you just brought up that I want to get back to in future conversations in terms of how we all perceive the term verse, switching roles in a profound relationship, because that's something that I've explored in my relationship. Yeah, there's a lot good there. And the one thing I do want to kind of reiterate that you said is about the being direct and asking about, knowing what you want and asking for specifics and not being ashamed to do that, because it's funny. I think even on the apps and with these anonymous encounters, we still sometimes let our insecurities get the better of us and like won't just ask for what we want. And if somebody ghosts me or somebody says, "Oh, that's not what I'm looking for," like there's no loss there. This is just at this point just an image on a screen that obviously was not meant to happen anyway. Because what I don't want an unsatisfactory and unsatisfying encounter, so I should only meet up with somebody where we can agree. And so,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it saves you so much time for someone to say, "Oh, that's not it for me right
yeah,
now."
yeah,
And it may not mean like that's not it forever,
Right.
right? Our tastes sort of, I don't know, it's not a straight line, it's not a curvy line.
Yeah.
It's like a squiggle line.
yeah, no, for sure. But yeah, my tastes, and this is another topic for a future conversation, is just the evolution of our tastes or our evolution as sexual beings. Certainly I find myself being more curious, and the curiosity comes out of a place of feeling more brave, actually. And you know, things that once upon a time I thought felt frightening for one reason or another, I now feel like, oh, I can dabble my toe there. Thank you, Judson. That was great. I hope, listener, I hope that you felt that answered your question. I thought that was a very insightful answer.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you,
And,
Judson.
Daddy-ness will evolve.
Yes. And I just want to reiterate one more time, you can reach us at dadsanddaddies@gmail.com. You can DM us on Instagram at Dads and Daddies Pod. And to please come back and listen to us again next week. Thank you so much for sticking through our first episode with us. We are kind of pinching ourselves. We kind of can't believe we did it. And we're looking forward to doing so many more.
We did it.
We did it. I'm so proud of us. And I
Me too.
hope our listeners agree.
Good job, Dad.
Good job, Daddy. Is that how we're going to end our episode?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all. And we will see you back here in a week.